Okay, recording now. Okay, guys. Hi again, everybody. Any questions, any comments today before we start? On Monday, we had what I think was a good introductory conversation to agriculture in Latin America. As I explained, what we are going to do for the next 3-4 sessions, we are going to slightly deeper into the characteristics of these three areas: agriculture, human resources, and labor markets in Latin America, because as I said, they are closely linked, and it's hard to understand one without looking at the other two. So anyway, questions, comments? Sandeep is here. Awesome, we have 24 students. Okay, I'm gonna start sharing my screen now. There we go. So because of the video and because we had a good conversation on Monday, I didn't have a chance to finish the introduction. So let me pick up where I left. So the last thing I said, or I spoke about, was these distortions produced by policies in rich countries. We talk about the subsidies, and that's the video that we saw. We also talk about the tariffs and how both subsidies and tariffs produce a very distortionary effect for farmers in Latin America, because they just cannot compete with the dumping from rich nations, and also they cannot penetrate the barriers imposed by these rich nations. So we already covered that part. But anyway, continue with these introductory comments. Let me continue here on the screen. In Latin America right now, roughly speaking, and of course, some countries have a larger percentage, some others smaller, but the average is around 25% of the value of total exports in Latin America correspond to agriculture. Now, remember, agriculture is not the only raw material. So we're talking about ag, but we also need to talk about fishery, timber, mining. So if you combine all raw materials, of course, this percentage is way higher, closer to 60–70% in some cases. Some countries have been able to expand beyond the traditional crops, the primary crops, if you will, like sugar and cocoa and bananas and pineapples and mangoes. And they have moved into more high value added, such as fruits, vegetables, flowers, nuts, and oil. Specifically, oil is an interesting case because it requires some processing. So you have the value added that provides the producer a higher profit margin. Brazil is one of those cases. Chile is another example. Mexico is another example. And of course, I already explained. Let me admit 2 more people. I already explained that the situation in Chile, for example, is an interesting one, because they were the first country that discovered the importance of taking advantage of the reverse seasons vis-a-vis the US. So this is why we can enjoy strawberries, peaches, and grapes, for example, in the US, here in Fresno, when we are totally off season. And if you look at the packaging, you're going to discover that many of these things are coming from Chile. So anyway, yes, it is true. It is true that agriculture in Latin America is making some progress in the sense of increasing productivity, in the sense of breaking into new markets that were traditionally close to Latin America, and in some other areas. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the benefits of this expansion and growth are not distributed equally. And I am going to, let me skip this for a second so I can show you. I don't know what I did. How do I make this smaller? Let's see. I did something with my mouse and it's just huge now. Oh, I know. There we go. I wanted to skip to this section right here. So I already mentioned this, but I want to formalize this conversation. Latin America has been and is still characterized by this dualistic structure of production. So I already mentioned that on the one hand, you have a large number of small-scale, traditional peasant agriculture. And on the other hand, you have a relatively small number of very large corporate farmers. So most of these improvements in agriculture in Latin America are not coming from the first group. No, they are coming from the second group. So I am going to talk about this later, but I just want to emphasize this part. And here, before we get into that part, I just want to make a comment about coca in Bolivia. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this product. It's typically we talk about coca leaves, and people in Bolivia and other Latin American countries nearby use coca for many purposes: medicine, food. In some cases, they can use coca leaves for makeup. You can go to places in Bolivia, go to the grocery store, and you can find, for example, a coca-based granola bar. Yeah. So you know, coca has a very bad reputation because, as you know, coca is used to form the cocaine base. And this is where I am not a chemist, so don't quote me on this, but there is a chemical component in the coca leaf that once extracted can be used for the formulation of cocaine, this super highly expensive, high demanded drug in, well, the US and around the world. But the fact of the matter is that coca, as you can see on the screen, is very versatile and more lucrative. Many people in Bolivia can make more money, way more money than cacao, citruses, rice. And this is why it's so popular, in addition to the cultural, historical importance for them. So they use this for medicinal purposes, for some rituals in some communities, and so forth. So anyway, all I'm trying to say is that this, in addition to the restrictions that I am going to speak about, and the difference between the first and the second structure in ag in Latin America, the economic and political reasons, there are some deeper reasons that go back to history, culture, belief systems, at least in the case of coca, although there are other similar crops around Latin America. But coca is a very good example that basically creates challenges for farmers to move away from these products, because they have been producing, growing these for generations and generations, and for them it works. Anyway, the last comment I want to make, and I have no way to verify this, but if you go to places like, I don't know, Wikipedia online, some people claim that Coca-Cola, the soda, in the recipe, they actually use coca. I don't know if that's true. And another issue that is more interesting and more difficult to prove, I guess, is that before cocaine was criminalized, the Coca-Cola formula had actually some components of that chemical. So after that, obviously now, presumably Coca-Cola doesn't have any of those things. But anyway, just some nuggets of what people say around there. Anyway, so let's keep going with this dualistic structure of production. This is key to understand what's happening in Latin American agriculture, guys. So let's talk about the first group first. Small peasant farming. They have a huge amount of challenges for many reasons. I'm just going to list a few here because, remember, my lecture notes are just a summary of your readings and many other things. But first, they don't have access to credit and resources as corporate farmers do. And we talked about this already. Sometimes it's because they lack the property rights, so they cannot, use the land they have to to present as collateral. Or in some cases, it's even worse. In some cases, the banking system and the financial system in some Latin American countries is so underdeveloped that you cannot find a branch of the bank in the community where you live. So it's just impossible to go to the financial sector because there is no financial sector presence into your community. So that's an interesting challenge. Another challenge, Sandeep went out and he's back. All right. Another challenge is that because of the size, which is small, of these peasant farmers, they cannot take advantage of the economies of scale in marketing, packaging, transportation, distribution, and many other things that happen after production. So this means that when you don't have access to these economies of scale because you are so small, your cost structure remains very, very high. And when your cost structure is high, you are not in a good position to charge a low price because you have to make some money to survive. So when you have to you're forced to charge a price higher than your high cost already, you are not able to compete, sometimes locally and certainly internationally. That's a problem. To add this to the challenges, regulations, in addition to tariffs and quotas, are huge, huge. Especially because many of these small peasant farmers don't understand international markets, don't understand what exporting means. They don't understand what crossing borders, sanitation regulations, all of these things that are, very well understood by corporate farmers. Small farmers don't have access to this type of knowledge, and that also reduces their ability to place their product internationally for sure, and sometimes nationally too, because, well, in some communities, they don't have the roads, in general, they don't have the transportation infrastructure to take the oranges or the bananas or whatever they produce out of the communities to the urban areas or another state in the country and so forth. And obviously, also they don't have access to the technology, including not just, biotechnology. I'm also talking about more basic things, fertilizers, pesticides, all of these things that make yield increase. So just to give you an idea, in the 1960s, the 1970s, scholars studying this stuff, they were debating, should we characterize agriculture in Latin America as, some sort of feudal structure or a capital structure, or, they were discussing things about names and characteristics and all of these things. But today, that debate is gone, totally gone. Now the debate is whether these guys, the peasant farmers, are actually going to survive, and I'm just quoting myself here, as a distinct type of household economy. As you know, we have seen in Latin America a huge migration. And the migration that I have been talking about is mostly from rural areas to urban centers where manufacturing and modernization is taking place. But there is also a significant amount of migration from the rural areas to other countries. So think about Mexico, think about Central America for in the case of the Central Valley here in California. We are the recipients of people from Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador, and others. In some other sections of the country, in some other states of the country, the makeup of the Hispanic community is very different. So if you go to places like Texas or Florida, for example, you're going to find more people from South America, from Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, and other places. Anyway, the point is that migration. When I say migration, I'm talking about domestic migration, which is huge, but also international migration, because these farmers, once they see the possibilities for growth, expansion, development disappear, and agriculture is the only source they have for survival, they have to migrate. They have to do something to survive. And well, as I already explained, some of them switch to illegal activities, but some of them just move. And that movement produces dramatic consequences for labor markets, as we will see later, for tax revenue, because they, when these workers move to the cities and they are not finding formal employment, we'll really talk about the underground economy. And also we are going to talk about education. Many of these families move, and sometimes because it's expensive, the opportunity cost of going to school is so high, because the kids, you better have the kids working on the streets, helping you on the business, than sending them to school, because if they go to school, they don't generate income. I am kind of jumping ahead of myself, but the point is, migration is a huge component of what's happening in Latin America today. Anyway, on the other hand, let's move on to the second group. You have the big corporate farmers. And here I'm giving you three names: Chiquita, Del Monte, Dole. So if you buy a banana or a pineapple or a papaya or some tropical exotic fruit that we don't produce here in the Valley or in the US, period, is typically coming from Latin America. In this particular case, the particular case of these three companies is typically coming from Central America or Mexico. This is the type of companies that are dominating the growth, expansion, increases in productivity in Latin America, because these are the companies that have access to the credit, to the economies of scale, they have access to the technology, they have all the resources and connections they need to produce, take care of the transportation, the marketing, the distribution. They are experts in doing this. So the other thing that is happening is that many of these companies are also switching from staple foods for humans, and they are switching that to food for animals. So some of the land that they capture that used to be used for, say, fruits or vegetables for human consumption, now is being used for soybeans or sorghum, something that is used to is for animal fed in developing countries, mainly the US, but not just the US. Some of this goes to Canada and other European countries. And of course, that reduces the amount of food produced for Latin American people. And because the argument is that this is for animals, we shouldn't be so concerned about the use of pesticides and fumigation and many other chemicals and engineering, genetic engineering happening there. And this is producing dramatic effects in the environment and in the biodiversity in Latin America. Now, on the more economic or political economy part of this equation, this is key as well. Corporations, multinational corporations like Chiquita, Del Monte, and Dole have changed the relationship between the peasants and the landowners. So many people that used to own the land, now they live there, but now they work for somebody else that actually owns the product. And in return, they just receive a salary. So they become workers in their own land, either because they sold it or because they moved to another location or many other combinations. The point is that now many farmers in Latin America are working as farmers, just like they used to do, but they don't own what they produce. The produce belongs to a corporation. And the other problem that has been happening is that because of the technology, and this includes obviously fertilizing and pesticides, but also mechanization, the technology is displacing a lot of workers. So right now in Latin America, the share of agriculture is around 21%. And for some of you, this may be like, well, what's the big deal? Here in the Valley, we are around 18, 16% in some cases. So 21% is not, it's not huge. Well, but remember, the Central Valley is a very unique place. If you consider what's the percentage of labor in the US as a nation devoted to agriculture, you're going to find that it's roughly 1%. 1% of the population in the US is engaged in agricultural activities. So when you talk about 21% for the entire region of Latin America, well, that's a big number. That's a big number. And it's declining. Right? Anyway, here is another problem. I really want you to keep in mind throughout this conversation that Latin America is still in debt. The 1980s, the lost decade, the collapse of the ISI system and the switch from ISI to neoliberal policies, all of this is still present in the conversations in 2021, because remember, Latin America still owes billions of dollars to the World Bank, the IMF, the Inter-American Development Bank, and actually some private banks too. So in the mind of these institutions, of course, remember, they are after, okay, in their bylaws, they are after the promotion of economic development, stabilization of balance of payments, and all of this is true. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that they need Latin America to pay back the owners of this capital. So these institutions are promoting and they are welcoming these increases in productivity and this expansion in the markets for agricultural stuff from Latin America as a mean to repay debts. It doesn't matter, so much at this particular juncture whether the expansion and the all these yield increases and productivities benefiting the majority of the population or not. What matters the most is that exporting these things, whether sorghum or soybeans for animals, or strawberries and peaches to the US, it doesn't matter what, as long as it generates the foreign exchange that Latin America can use to pay back the debt. That's all. That's a very important goal. Not that all it matters, but it's one of the most important goals. Now, another problem. Even those multinational corporations sometimes suffer some reversals to their successes. Because remember, the relative price to manufacture goods or services, the relative price of primary goods over time tends to go low. And I go back to my example of, okay, 20 years ago, it was enough to produce 1 metric ton of bananas in exchange for 1 car. But now, because the price of bananas is lower, Latin American countries have to produce not 1, but 2 metric ton of bananas to buy the same car, right? So even multinational corporations are facing this drop in relative prices, which obviously implies a reduced ability to generate foreign exchange. Okay, but that's a minor problem, right? I mean, that's a big problem for everybody, but for a multinational corporation, okay, they can deal with that just because of volume and just because, okay, they are dominating Latin America in this respect. So before I open up this for some conversation, this is a key element, guys, because and I am highlighting this on the screen, because of food security. And I already mentioned this briefly in the past, but let me emphasize this once again. Food security has nothing to do with food safety. So this is not about, when you eat something that is going to make you ill. No, this is food security different from food safety. By food security in political economy, we mean this: the dependence of one country on another country for their food supply. In this case, we're talking about an entire region, Latin America, depending on another set of countries, rich countries, on the provision of food. So think about this. If Latin American countries are not able to produce enough food domestically to satisfy the needs of their own population, let's think about beans, rice, corn, or any other things like that, they need to buy the extra production to satisfy consumption in international markets. But in order to do that, first they need to generate a foreign exchange, because the international vendors are not going to accept domestic currency. They are not going to accept Bolivian pesos in exchange for rice. No, they want dollars, they want euros, they want Japanese yens, right? So this generates a huge dependence on the generation of foreign exchange. And worse, what happens if for some reason, like the US has done many times, they say, okay, we don't like the political regime in your country. And unless you change, and of course, typically we use the human rights violations, anti-democratic means to elect of leadership, or whatever type of argument, the US, as a matter of foreign policy, says, you know what, we are going to impose some sanctions of you. Oh, what do you mean? Well, guess what? No rice for you, no corn for you. So the idea with these economic sanctions is to create domestic pressure among the locals, the nationals in this country, to rebel, to produce, some sort of internal conflict, so that they change the regime to the likes of rich countries. This is huge, right? I mean, I don't know if you can see the importance of this, but the US has done this many, many times. Not just in Latin America, including Nicaragua, Guatemala, certainly Cuba. And this is, let me extend this to other things. They can do this not just for food, they can do this for medicine too. And other things that are very important, essential for the livelihood of people. And not only in Latin America, the US and other rich nations, European nations, are doing this in other places like, Iraq, North Korea, and some other places that are not friendly, or they don't espouse the same principles as the ones espoused by rich nations in mainly these multilateral institutions. Anyway, let me stop here to see if you have some comments or remarks, guys, or questions. Anybody?
Hello, Dr. Avalos.
Yes, Chad.
How is the debt repayment going well? Is it decreasing the principal amount?
In general, the answer is okay. The general answer is yes. The face value of the debt is going down as a whole. But there is and this is the result of combinations of a combination of countries doing this more successfully and others doing really bad. So let me give you one example. Costa Rica is one country that was able to eliminate completely its international debt. And the way they did that is by doing something called, I forgot the technical name, but it has to do with eco swaps. So they said, you know what, we cannot pay you because we don't have the money. But if we create, international international ecological reserves, and we, protect such and such particular areas for biodiversity, and this is how Costa Rica is like a heaven for many people in the US. You have hundreds of thousands of people living in Costa Rica right now. So they go to the ATM machine, they draw on their social security. But anyway, that's another story. The point is that Costa Rica, taking advantage of the natural resources, the political regime, the size of the country, and many other characteristics, was able to, I don't know exactly when, 10, 15 years ago, to eliminate the debt. Now, if you compare Costa Rica with Argentina, Argentina is going in the opposite direction because, well, a combination of factors. Much larger economy, they didn't have the same resources to mimic what the people in Costa Rica did, mismanagement in the policies, and of course, the amount of debt they had, it was much more higher. Anyway, things are going worse in some countries like Argentina. Things are going a lot better in some other countries like Costa Rica. But in general, I think there has been an improvement. The problem is that, remember, one of the solutions to the debt problem back in the 80s, or rather the 90s, was very similar to what we did here in 2007, 2009. Remember? So we said, okay, rather than reducing the face value of the debt, what we are going to do is to extend the number of years. So if you have a mortgage of 15 years, well, let's double this to 30 or 40 years. Actually, some mortgages of 50 years, which was crazy, right? 50 years mortgage. And the idea was to reduce the monthly payment because, technically speaking, the best customers for a bank are not necessarily the ones that pay in full. You want to keep dragging these guys because the longer they pay in time, the more interest you also charge. So I don't know if this answers your question, Chad, but that's in general terms what's happening.
Yes, thank you. That's interesting, and that's very creative, or for them to find that route.
Yes,
it's very complicated.
Yes,
as we're learning.
Very complicated. Now, here are another example, just to add to the complexity. So some countries were in such huge troubles where the inflation was out of control, the confidence in the federal government was gone, that they start developing alternative parallel markets that eventually produce the dollarization of their economies. So when you lose confidence in your government, you lose confidence in the currency of your government because it's going to lose value very quickly. So you start accumulating dollars or any other foreign exchange. In the case I'm speaking in particular is Ecuador. Ecuador was in such a big trouble that people in Ecuador start accumulating dollars from remittances, from traveling overseas, or just capturing here and there more and more and more and more until it became so unsustainable because the amount of dollars circulating in the economy was so big that overtook the sucre, which was the name of the Ecuadorian currency at the time. And guess what? If you go to Ecuador now in 2021, the sucre is gone. The Ecuadorian economy is completely dollarized. You go to the grocery store, you want to buy a piece of bread, you pay in dollars, US dollars, right? So in those cases, it's a very different situation because they cannot print dollars. Well, they can illegally, but it's even more difficult for them because the local currency is foreign exchange already. They don't want to take it out as payments because that just reduces the amount of money that circulates in the economy. If you think of this in mercantilist terms, it's like sending gold out of the country. You don't want to do that, right? So again, we normally think of Latin America as this monolithic entity that has the same color, the same shape, the same history, the same problems, the same challenges, but actually the reality is not. There is like a mosaic, different patches here and there, and all of them have different issues. Yeah. Good question, Chad. Good question. Thank you. Anybody else, guys? Jacob, please go ahead.
I just had a quick question. Were there any other Latin American countries that were able to completely eliminate their debt, or is it only Costa Rica?
I should know the answer to that one, Jacob. I honestly don't know. For some reason, Costa Rica comes to mind like this because it's one of the most celebrated examples. Let me think here for a second. You know, as far as I know, as far as I can tell, and as far as I remember, Costa Rica is the only one. Yeah, but we can research the issue. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you, Jacob.
Oh, that's all good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so let me pick up on, okay, did I see another hand? No. All right, let me continue then. All right, here is just a table that shows the decline in the labor force employment in agriculture, you know, just to show the decline because again, migration, people moving away from the rural areas. This is the value of ag. You know, big numbers, old numbers. I really don't want to spend too much time on these, so I'm just going to skip. Let me finish this section with these three arrows here. Let me start with this, the last two. As I already mentioned, many of these peasant farmers don't have, because of weak infrastructure, don't have access to roads, drinkable water, electricity, communications, all of this infrastructure. And of course, that produces big challenges for them. Even if they were like super productive, even if they figure out the way to increase yields to whatever, they don't have a way to get the product out to the market, right? The other problem is that many of these farmers that we don't have the knowledge, don't have a good understanding of how to use the new technologies. So they start using fertilizers, pesticides, and many other things, in some cases with very large human implications. So there have been some studies where they have found, get this DDT, I don't know if you're familiar with DDT, this I remember when I was growing up in Mexico, we used to have these things that you will spray DDT to kill spiders and ants and all sorts of insects, but it's like super toxic, right? So, okay, people in Latin America are doing the same thing without knowing or understanding the consequences. And there have been some studies where they have found DDT in breast milk because humans consume all these things, and eventually it ends up in, well, the human body, and it goes out through milk and other, you know, things to babies and stuff. So food poisoning, erosion of the land, depletion of nutrients, reduction in the biodiversity, all of these things are happening in Latin America. Not by design, not because they want to do it. It's just, again, a combination of things that are not working well. Now, here is another very interesting, hugely interesting aspect of agriculture in Latin America, guys. I am sure things are changing now for different reasons that we can discuss later, but for decades, the traditional migrant, especially those moving internationally, were middle-aged males, workforce in agriculture. And most of them, we capture them, well, many of them, we capture them here in the Valley, you know, either legal or undocumented workers with H-1B visas or not. Anyway, the point is that the vast majority of the people that leave the communities in Latin America searching for opportunities in another country like the US are male. And as a consequence, we can see, and we have seen what scholars call the feminization of agriculture in Latin America. I can take you to some towns in Mexico where, believe it or not, 80%, 85% of the population are female. And when you talk to them, you know, what happened? Where are the guys? What do you mean? They are in LA. They are in Fresno. So okay, you may be thinking, so well, what's the big deal? Well, think about that in, you know, we can break this up into so many different areas. You know, think about, for example, if you want to be in some of you are in sociology, think about the breakup of the families, you know, distancing. You don't see your children, you only send them money. And then you have other issues that are more serious, you know, like, okay, now these guys living alone, they have probably another companion that have to take care of, and they start abandoning their families in Mexico. Okay, that's the sociological, anthropological aspect, right? Now, let's go back to the economics. Well, it is quite challenging, guys, for a female in Latin America to do what they usually do, which is to be mothers, you know, taking care of the children, sometimes homeschooling, feed the children, and in addition to do that, work in the fields. You think about that. Think about that. It's you know, many people actually think that in some respects, females in Latin America are feeding many regions, not just in Mexico, but in other places around the world, or not just in Latin America, but in many other places around the world. These ladies are incredible. They are like super hardworking. They work in very difficult conditions, not just economically speaking, but emotionally, psychologically, the pressures they face. And on top of that, on top of all of that, because of discrimination and this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this word, machismo, you know, this discrimination against the females. If in the US, the difference between male and females is, I think nationwide, roughly speaking, 17 cents per dollar, you know, the differential that some scholars attribute to discrimination. So once you compare same occupation, same skill level, but you have male and female, that's what I'm talking about, the 17% gap, or 17 cents per dollar, whatever you want to call it. In Mexico, this, in many Latin American countries, this differential is way higher, way higher. So on top of that, these amazing female workers are underpaid. They work for really, really low wages. So anyway, think about that too, because you know, I just don't want to focus on the economics of this. I mean, there are many, many human, psychological, emotional consequences of, well, this type of issues. Anyway, let me finish with this last section. In addition to all of these problems that I have already explained, we in economics think about the structural challenges facing Latin America. So let me give you a few. Number one, politicians, especially those that have their mindset into the future, they don't think that the future is in ag. They think the future is in manufacturing, services, artificial intelligence, robotization, all of these things. Agriculture, it's a declining sector with falling prices. We don't have to pay attention to this. We need to move on. We need to look into the future, not into the past. All right, first issue. Second issue, the rural poor are typically invisible and have no voice. And of course, this is just my rhetorical way to express that they live in remote locations, in the Sierras, 200, 300 miles away from the cities. We don't see them. We know they are there, but we don't see them. We don't listen to them. You don't see them on TV, in the news. They don't go to the cities to shop. They live in their community. So invisible and no voice, no political power, right? Number three, the policies typically are centralized. So you have a policymaker in the city making decisions for hundreds of thousands of people living 300-400 miles away. And this politician in front of the desk, in front of the computer, has never been in that remote location. He or she doesn't understand what these families are going through. He or she doesn't understand nothing, but they are making policy in a centralized location. That's another problem, right? Anyway, I already talked about these incomplete markets, no access to credit, the problem with property rights. Here is another issue that has to do with the nature of agriculture, and this is happening all over the world, not just in Latin America. Agriculture is such a sector that is subject to significant volatility. Think about weather conditions. Think about temperature changes, fires, floods. All of these things can have a huge impact on agriculture. So lending is riskier, and insurance is way, way more expensive, right? So in addition to all of these complications, you have to think about the financial aspect. Lending to a farmer is way more risky. And insurance, providing insurance, typically when it exists, because in many cases, insurance companies totally say, you know what, I'm not going there. I am not going to risk my money there. Even if they pay me a huge premium, it's too risky. Even when they exist, is very, very high, very high. Anyway, I think I'm going to stop here. In the recording, I am going to talk about some policy options and all that, and that's going to be recorded for Friday. But I think I'm going to stop here in case you have some questions or comments. Anything, Cody, please go ahead.
Yeah, so the commercial lending that they prefer over agricultural lending, is there specific sectors they would prefer? Because I'd imagine although maybe they're not as competitive in agriculture, I'd imagine they'd have a much larger advantage in agriculture over a lot of commercial sectors.
Yeah, well, in Latin America, it's interesting that you asked this question, but I think it's similar in the US in some respects. Different banks typically specialize in particular sectors. So, for example, here in the Valley, you have a particular bank that deals with ag, another one that deals with manufacturing, and even more specialized. Some banks go for a particular type of size of the business or things like that. In Latin America, it's the same. So there is no. I don't want to give you the illusion that all banks are against ag or that all banks prefer the same thing. No. I mean, there are banks or insurance companies that actually make loans or provide insurance, very few and very expensive, but like any other region in the world, different banks have a different customer base, if you will, and different insurance companies as well. Does that make sense, Cody?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I am sure big international or international banks, they go, it doesn't matter, right? They take every sector, every size and all that. But as you know, here in the Valley, for example, we have many regional banks, small banks that also only operate in the Valley, really. And they have a very well-defined niche market, right? It's the same in Latin America or the same in anywhere in the world, really. While big banks can cover everything. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Guys, it's 2:50 and I have a department meeting at 3 o'clock. I need to get ready. So I think I'm going to stop recording now. Stop